I don't feel that I'm providing our advisory service for our client by giving them access to reports, by giving them access to information, by showing up to a meeting with them. That's not enough. I'm advising our client when the gap between where they are and where they want to be is closing. And I feel that that is the ultimate arbiter.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Strategy in the Virtual Controller, where my co-host Penny Breslin and we talk about all things accounting, all things technology, workflow, good clients, bad clients, pricing, the lessons we've learned along the way, the mistakes we've learned along the way. And every now and then we get to welcome a guest onto today's episode. I'm your co-host, Damien Greathead. I'm sitting in Sydney. Penny, where are you today? Are you in San Diego or?
No, I'm in Wyoming babysitting a dog that's frightened by snow, hail, and rain all in one day.
So, well, hang on. Let's take a step back. You're in Wyoming, but your dog is afraid of snow, rain, wind, and hail. And you took the dog to Wyoming. Does the dog live in
my
Wyoming?
Other dogs who were born in Wyoming, I was just telling James, because one of them was from Chubwater, which is just a few clicks north of where he's in Cheyenne. And they love it. They love this weather. But I've got one that's hiding up in my closet. Freaking out because of the rain. And then 15 minutes ago, hail and snow this morning. Like, snow?
Wow.
What's that? Oh my God. So, yeah.
So 6 seasons in one day. And as I said there, every now and then we're lucky enough to welcome a guest to the episode. And today we have one as well. And did you just say that he's also sitting in Wyoming? What's the chances of that?
Yes, I know. He's on the south end of Wyoming. I'm about 120 miles or so north of James, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so Penny, why don't you introduce James?
All right, James. I met James accidentally and confused him with the person, Jeff, who introduced us, because Jeff's in Montana, James is in Cheyenne. Is he in Butte or Great Falls? I can't remember. Anyways,
yeah.
James is a client of Jeff's, and they look alike. And they told me the same story. And so when I was confirming the Zoom interview with James, I said to Jeff by accident, he called me, he goes, I don't know anything about live flow and Tableau. I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, are you talking about James? God, the two of you look alike. He goes, I know, I hear that a lot. So anyways, James is a recovered CPA, can I say?
Oh, I'm feeling much better. Yes, thank you.
And who verticalized, who went into complete CAS and utilizes some accountants on his team, but also some non-accountants, and he's going to tell you why. And what I want to know is what it felt like and how long it took him once he made the decision to start the journey, to become the journey that he is now. So, James,
Sure.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I was born at a very young age. And after a lot of time passed, I eventually became an accountant and did a lot of different things. So my career was very broad. If there's any one thing I sort of specialized in, it was audit. I did that for about 13 years until I got a little tired of telling my clients a list of things that were wrong with their systems and not being able to fix it because I was their auditor. So got rid of the auditing and started working in-house with these clients and helping them fix things, and eventually started getting asked more and more questions along the lines of managing their business and managing their company and planning for the future. And over time, it just became something that we were doing more and more of. And at the same time, we were doing so many other things as well. And so I was like most accountants, where someone showed up at the front door and they had, a story and they had a need, and it was like, oh yeah, we do that too. And just found ourselves really spread way thin, and especially me spread way thin. Like, I think it was 3 years ago, we had 18 people on my team, and we were doing a lot of different work, and it was all somehow to a certain extent flowing through me. And I realized that there was an aspect of our work that I liked more than any other, and that was working directly with the owner, helping them plan, helping them build a better future for themselves with their business, and really wanted to dive into that entirely. So it took about probably, I think, 3, maybe 4 years from start to finish. But last year we sold the last of the traditional work. We had sort of members of the team want to embrace certain aspects of the work, and we kind of sent them off doing it with, our blessing. But sort of the final kind of nugget in the middle of everything we sold as one big package, and continued to market and develop all of our advisory services. And that was actually December 1st. So here we are doing just the thing we like most. So
How do you feel about doing just the thing you like the most?
it's a totally different flow. So, and I guess I would say, we do a lot of marketing now, which isn't necessarily something I'm good at or that I enjoy a lot. But when it comes to client service, I'll tell you what, it's great to not be a sunk cost, not be just one other expense, but actually be part of a client's success and help them move the needle in the right direction. And having return on investment for a client, earning our keep, is really an incredible reward. So I love it.
That is an amazing way to put it. That you have been able to see that and enjoy that and have your client look at you and say, that's because of what you did.
Yeah.
That's cool. 1 second. There's somebody at my door. Damien, pick up the pace.
I'll take over. I mean, James, it's quite fascinating. So, like, let's sort of look before and after. So, how many clients are you working with now, and how many sort of, you sold your last set of clients that weren't a fit in December? But what does that mean? Help us understand sort of the size of or number of clients that you're working with now. How many were you working with? Yeah.
Yeah. So before, clients of varying sizes, we had, I think last year around this time, we had about 16 clients. And so, we had 3 that were very high touch. So basically they were the full suite. We were doing bookkeeping, payroll, all the way up to, the high level service, all those things were present. And now we're at about, I think, 5 clients now. And we do a lot of co-working with other accountants, as sort of advisory support with some sort of project work and stuff like that. So we have considerable capacity we're looking to fill. And that's why I spend a lot of time on podcasts, talking to people.
But I mean, that's actually quite a brave move, which I think a lot of practitioners, a lot of firm owners really struggle with. Is I'm going to get rid of clients so that I can focus on the things we like the most, to use your words. But that's actually at the expense of revenue in the short term. And that's a really difficult decision for a lot of folks to make. So how did you come to terms with this shortfall in, I'm guessing a shortfall in revenue in the short term to make this, which gives you the space to do what you want. But how did you come to terms with that sort of a decision?
Sure. Well, it didn't happen overnight. So part of that 3 to 4 year track actually was grappling with that decision and realizing that having all the different things going at once, all the different service lines going at once, really was diluting the ability to be highly effective in any one area. It was, to put it a different way, rather than half-assing something, I wanted to whole-ass something, and focus in, because I was acknowledging that the entrepreneurial track, which I was about to embark on, was similar to most of my clients, where they're technically competent in an area, so they decide to open a business that does that technical thing, and running that business is different than doing the technical thing. So we did have to sort of embark on that journey, but it came with the acknowledgement that if we focused in, the intrinsic value would be there. It would be enhanced because we'd be paying closer attention to the experience our customer had, as opposed to before being spread out through all these different things. We'd be paying very close attention to that, nurturing that, building our ability to serve to a very high level, and that would carry us onward. So, so we took a lot of time, and that's in part why Penny was intrigued by what we do, because by no means did I jump into advisory and say, I'm this big shot and I've got all the answers. I jumped into advisory with a very specific approach to being sure I could find the answers and justify them with our work and guide our clients in a real way to help them have success. So
one of the things that you mentioned right before I got up to answer the door and that you told me about was, and this was also part of what Damien and I wrote about, is that you have to pick the right team. And you mentioned that when you made this decision, some people of the 18 that were working for you were not on board with it.
yes.
And you allowed them to take what they had and do something different, because to keep them would have been a detriment to what you were eventually going to build. Is that a case?
Very true. Yeah, very true.
And considering they were probably all in Cheyenne, right?
No.
Well,
yeah. So, even before COVID, we were like,
Remote.
80% virtual. And after that, even clients in the same town we met with over Zoom. So at that point, our hiring went global, or not global, but nationwide. And so we had people all over the place. I was working with early when we started hiring, I was working with a lady who was in Arkansas, and she was actually nocturnal because she had a young child, and she basically had to watch the child all through the evening because of a difficulty with the child's health. So it was an interesting match, because I found us having a 24-hour firm where, overnight things would show up for clients the next morning. But yeah, we were definitely nationwide. And so that was a big part of it.
When I was a student at Montana and Bozeman, one of the things that, and this was way back before probably either of you may have been born or been in school, but Wyoming and Montana were pretty advanced on education through video and through the internet, because they're so sparsely populated that was some ways the only way we could get decent classes in for our students.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm not surprised that somebody in Wyoming, just like me, back up in here in Casper, back in 1999, went, hey, I have to be here or be there to do that.
Yeah.
Neither the people that work for me. So he had to select a team that was going to move with him and get rid of those that didn't want to, and be cognizant of the reason they didn't want to, and be open to giving them the space and the time to move on. We did that too in 1999 when we went virtual, and we hosted QuickBooks on a server back in the day. And we literally took 6 months to tell those employees that were not going to come with us, let us help you find something else. And we spent 6 months, we were their HR department. We went out and found jobs for them, fitted them into the right place. And no, that's great. Then the other thing you had to do is you went vertical.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Talk about that.
that was tricky too. So, again, in the advisory space, there's a lot of players now, right? And there's, our credential as CPAs doesn't really restrict competition in that way. So there's a lot of people who can emerge and are offering services along those lines. And so it really is important to differentiate yourself some way. Otherwise, you just don't stand out to anyone. And so being mindful of the marketing and us wanting to launch and really start bringing on clients, we dove into our primary area of service. And our longest running client in the advisory was a mental health private practice. So they had already referred us out to several other, friends of theirs, and we'd done good work for them over the years, and a lot of success came from that. And so, intrigued by that vertical, I actually went to the American Psychology Association conference in August of last year and walked around like, tell the weirdo, and no, everyone would look at my badge. They'd be like, "Oh, CPA, what are you doing here?" And I told them what we did, and this was so encouraging because everyone had the same response. Some of them even physically, they hold their hands up. They go, "Oh, we need that," and they were all saying the same thing. And in that particular niche, these are professionals, and a little bit like with CPAs, they have a state-governed credential that governs the ownership of their company, i.e., they're a therapist, a social worker, a psychologist, And that type of business must be owned by someone with that type of credential. So there aren't a lot of businessy types associated with those businesses, but though for those of them who are, courageous enough to start a business in that area, they are deficient in many of the things that relate to the business world that we feel very comfortable with. Financial reports are kind of daunting and sort of scary to them, not to diminish at all their skill set. They just have one in one area, whereas we can come and support in the other area. So the need was there, sort of the offering was high value to them because it moves the needle for them in a significant way. And the demand was high in the industry itself, which was evident by the way everyone raised their hands in exclamation and said, we need that, pretty much across the board. So I decided, we're going to push into that vertical, and we were going to lean hard into the letters of reference that we already had, and especially what we had accomplished on the data side to be able to serve them at a high level. So,
James, that's
They do
absolutely amazing.
financial health or mental health consultants.
yeah.
And one quick question. How does the American Psychological Association Society annual conference compare to some of the accounting conferences that you attended? What's the pros and cons, or the likes, and what's similar and what's different?
Well, so I have a great story along those lines, which really guided my whole career. So probably the biggest conference I attended was a Don Farmer seminar, like a tax update. And he, this was years ago, actually, when I was just starting out, but went to this tax conference, and it was 2 days, 8 hours a day. And it was like 400 CPAs in this big hall, and everyone learning the tax updates. And on the drive back, the CPA who I was working with, who was a solo practitioner, he looks at me, he says, you know what, James? Most CPAs are just boring snobs. It's like, oh my gosh, like, is this what I'm doomed to? Like it felt like, oh no, have I shown up in the wrong room? And I will say that I've been with a lot of accountants over the years and known a lot of accountants over the years. And some of them do struggle to communicate, and some of them are better at it than others. But I'll say that this particular conference, it was much more recent, of course, and the whole motto of the conference was "You belong," and it was very much that experience where everyone I met was very open, very inclusive, and wanting to learn about my background, and so it was really positive, and it really was encouraging to think that we could bridge the gap and help these folks understand how we could help.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess, how did the clients outside of your vertical, as you were talking to them about and moving them on, how did they respond to your specialization, to your verticalization, to you saying we're not suited to you anymore? That was my other sort of question that I had written down here, was how did your non-ideal clients, how did they react?
Yeah, so I would say, to a certain extent, the diluting of the attention and the value proposition for our clients at the time, it was relatively clear, I think, to everyone. And when you're working with clients and you don't feel like you were timely enough and you don't feel like you were accurate enough in something that was presented, we've always owned that. We've always, expressed it to the client. So to a certain extent, when we unveiled it and sort of spread the news, we were quite open with the fact that, hey, we really think we've been spread way too thin. And we really think that our service offering to you, regardless of how much we wanted it to be at a stratospheric level, it wasn't where we wanted. And so being very open with them, saying like, hey, the whole industry is kind of going through this. Talent is tough. We had sort of a revolving door for a while with people who showed up, and then, were kind of, insensitive to the client's needs and didn't know how to communicate, and wore a t-shirt on Zoom meetings and stuff like that, so there were a lot of things going on. And so they kind of knew. And so the other thing too, is we were very careful with who our buyer was. It honestly took us 10 months, and there were 3 deals that almost got signed that I walked away from because I just didn't get the right feeling. So when we actually encouraged the clients to work with our buyer, which of course they can vote with their feet if they want to, but when we went through that transition, I was able to tell these people the lengths I went to vet our buyer. And and how diligent we were in making sure there was a good fit in terms of their skill, in terms of their customer service level. I mean, so it was effectively, I guess, to boil it all down into kind of one statement, it was effectively us telling them, we think your service level will be upgraded by working with this person. Like we think you're going to do better because they're focused in on this, and now we're focusing in on that.
Yeah, brilliant. And Penny, I know you're about to jump in, but I have one other burning question is, what's your definition of advisory? It's not a burning question by any means. What's your definition of
It's
advisory?
always our question, so it is burning.
Well, what's your definition of advisory services? And the reason that I ask is everywhere you look and every article you read that it's all about advisory, but and CAS, but nobody really, I think a lot of firms struggle with actually defining what it means to them, because it can mean so many different things. It's this umbrella of services, and there's a full spectrum of services that sit underneath it. What does it mean to you, and what types of things are you doing for your clients that fall under this umbrella of advisory, of CAS, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly there's a lot of people talking about that. My stance on it is quite aggressive. So I don't feel that I'm providing our advisory service for our client by giving them access to reports, by giving them access to information, by showing up to a meeting with them. That's not enough. I'm advising our client when the gap between where they are and where they want to be is closing. And I feel that that is the ultimate arbiter, because I don't put it on my client to decide what aspect of my skill set moves the needle for them. So it's not up to them to decide whether they need a forecast right now. It's not up to them to decide whether they need to be industry benchmarked. It's not up to them to decide whether there's a threat from their industry that's going to affect them. It's up to me to decide what tool I have that moves the needle in the right direction. So rather than abdicating responsibility for that, I take responsibility for that. And I have to decide in each meeting, and this is the biggest part of it, I can do 100 different things for that client, and I can understand their financial information, to a significant extent. But I can also explain a whole bunch of things to them that don't actually help them. I can show them a bunch of reports that don't actually help them. It's my job to show them in each meeting we have each month something that moves them closer to what they want to accomplish with their business and with their life. And that's a high standard to meet, but that's the one I place on myself.
And actually, Penny, that's sort of something that we've talked about a lot, is to do, and so I think in that sort of respect, you're very much at this far end of the spectrum of really playing that almost part-time CFO type role in the business. And
yes, he is.
And if that's the role that you're playing, then you actually need to give yourself a lot of space to look at the client file, to think creatively, to really understand what's going on in the business. And Penny, that's something that you and I have spoken a lot about, is making sure that you have the space, the time, the mental capacity to actually deliver on that role for your clients, if that's that full end of the spectrum that you're going for. But I think that's really interesting, because I think a lot of folks and a lot of things that you read suggest that it's much more formulaic, suggests that it's every month we do this and we lob this report over and we do this and we do this. But that's, and that could be their definition of advisory. But actually your definition of advisory is very much, I like that, closing the gap of where they are and where they want to be. And it's up to me to go into my tool set. I really like what you said in terms of, I have to identify which of my tools I'm going to bring to the meeting to demonstrate value and to show what's going on. I think that's actually really, really quite powerful, the way that you phrase that.
Yeah, and it's a significant challenge, because the backstop with that, and this is something that we've had to sort of carry in our back pocket, is some clients are more receptive to the input than others, And so one of the rules that I've had for quite a while is, if we have, for me, I can earn money all kinds of different ways, as we all can, right? The win for me is being surrounded by clients that I've enriched their life. And that's really the goal. So if for some reason that's not taking place, we have to have a backstop. And so one of our rules is, if we give a client, well, we rank our recommendations, right? And we always work with them to make sure, hey, is there anything that I'm missing? Like, do you see something inside the business? Because we treat them like the expert in their particular business. Is there something we're missing? But at the end of every meeting, it should be like, these are the critical recommendations. These are the worthwhile recommendations, and these are things to consider. If we give them the same critical recommendation 3 times in a row, and they haven't followed it, and it hasn't gotten traction, we have a pretty serious conversation about whether this is really a good fit or not, because we may just not be the right person for them. We may not be a good match. We may not be explaining things well. I'm not going to be a boring snob, right? So I'm not going to just assume that my answer is their right answer. But certainly if they're working with me and that gap is not getting closed, something is missing. And I want to treat that as an important item to consider. So,
I think
But
that's
also,
ballsy and respectful at the same time.
but also, absolutely. But also, I think it's probably a learning curve for the client as much as you, isn't it? In terms of, oh, hang on, now this person is coming into my business and asking questions probably that haven't been asked before. So it's them going on a journey as much as anything as well. Like you've sort of come to this realization, and I think where the role that you can play. But if you meet someone at a conference and they throw their arms up and you have those discovery calls and they sign on with you, it's still a journey for them though, because they're transitioning from probably what was a quite transactional relationship with their CPA and bookkeeping team to a much more integrated relationship.
Much more partnership.
Yeah.
It's a partnership focus.
And
I'm here
so
to
that's
help
probably-
you, and by helping you, I benefit because I'm doing what I like and I'm not bored.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to ask the next question, which is, so far he's gone through the first 3 or 4 chapters in our book. He's just done them, okay? And he's never read that book. That's because it's not rocket science. It's general knowledge that if you live a normal life and interact with other human beings, you eventually find this stuff out. But the next step was because I already asked him this, so because I've talked to James already, his tech stack. What is it that he uses to allow him the security and the comfort to present these critical, we need to do this and you should look at these comments when he has these meetings? And I was fascinated by the way he developed his company. So I'd like you to talk about who does what and what apps they use to give you the data that makes you feel comfortable doing this.
Sure. Yeah. So the philosophy we have there is grounded in my idolization of William Edwards Deming, which a lot of folks on the podcast probably know about Deming, but just in case, Deming is really a figurehead in the business world. He went over to Japan after World War II, and World War II basically was, blasted into the Stone Age. And he is largely credited as being majority responsible for what they now call the Japanese economic miracle, which is where the country of Japan went from this absolute rubble stack to being the 3rd largest economic superpower in 20 to 30 years. Really just an amazing thing. And I tell the story because I always like to ground out the quotes that really guide us. And one famous quote that really is central, our foundation to what we do, is Deming famously said, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." And so he might also say, "Without data, you're just a boring snob," but I don't think he said that. But anyway, so it's very important to us that we don't approach the client with poorly thought out hunches and, a lack of understanding of really what's going on. We want to use the data as much as possible and as much data as we can get our hands on to really add power and velocity to what we're doing. So being that we're experts in financial understandings, as you guys are and all CPAs should be, and all that, what we can see from the financial results is always going to be symptomatic. So it's always going to be an indicator, albeit a very valid indicator, especially if the financial statements are correctly prepared, but it's going to be an indicator of something else. And so the way I like to describe it is the financial statements are kind of like the outer envelope of every business. It's sort of it's not the interior of the business. And the thing that makes a business work and makes a business effective is a high value experience for their customer and managing that high value experience and optimizing it. So the ultimate thing that's upstream of all of these financial results is the experience that their customer has. And then there's all these things that happen in the middle. And what we found is when we're working with clients, there's a stage typically at the beginning of our advisory engagement where advising off of the financials can sometimes be sufficient. We can sometimes tell them something, maybe a particular period of time where they did things really well, or a period of time where they did things really poorly. Maybe we can see divisions and we can very clearly just say, hey, this thing's losing money. Stop doing that, something like that. But as the client evolves through the advice that they are getting from us, we have to start moving upstream. Otherwise, we run out of things that are competent ways to move the needle for them. So this is where data analysis comes into play, because at some point, because of the way that whole thing works, at some point you'll move from the symptoms, which are the financial results and the actual cash flows and net income and so on and so forth. You'll move eventually from there into causes. And the causes will most likely be based in some level of operations data or some level of thing that's taking place inside the client or inside ultimately the customer experience that downstream is creating that negative financial result. So that's really the process. And so we use Tableau as a way to visualize and report that information to our client, which of course we want to come to them with something that they can understand. That is data. That is not just our opinion. So we want them to be able to sort of get into the weeds without getting lost in the weeds, so to speak. So we want to show them something that communicates this. And so Tableau is a critical reporting tool for us where we can say, there's your problem. This is the area you need to tweak. There's another problem. There's another problem. There's another problem. And so everything in the middle there is really crunching the data. And some of our own templates and tools that we've created are basically, it's going to look like, a mess to the client, like just a bunch of tables, but it is accrual cost accounting, and so attributing costs to different areas. Yeah.
You have a CPA who works for you who just does your Tableau, right?
But yeah, so we have an outside CPA who's a specialist in Tableau. And that's really one of her focuses is digital or data visualization. In-house, one of my team members is quite good with Tableau, but usually when we first bring on a client, we've got to tailor it to their data sources. There's kind of heavy lifts. And usually that's when we lean on Carrie. She's our Tableau specialist. Yeah.
And then you have a data scientist or a data analyst.
Yes.
They work with data in LiveFlow to create.
I think you might be referring to LivePlant. Yeah. And so we'll do the work directly in LivePlant, but the data scientists are who we bring in. They're like our favorite geeks. They're sort of like the ninjas, that show up just out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden all the bad guys are laying on the ground. But what they do, what they're especially good at is the bundling of data sources. So I'll give you kind of an example of this. And this is sort of a project that we're working on for a client. We're trying to help a client sort of move the needle on building their annual recurring revenue. Most critical metric for them is the growth of annual recurring revenue. So they're trying to bring on, it's a high ticket offering, and we're trying to help them see how they can use data to build that. So using data science, what we can do is we can start laddering or sort of stacking different sets of data. So if we take basically the clients they have that are most satisfied, we connect that with clients in similar industries or prospects in similar industries, and we connect that with perhaps demographic median income by county, which we use. We can help them identify clients that are the highest likely high value prospects and narrow that down just by the use of bundling all those data sources and putting it together into a report that's digestible. So that's an example of where we would be gathering things that are probably in a spreadsheet, gathering things that are in their CRM like HubSpot, gathering things from the financial statements, as in the clients who are already satisfied and on board, and then, so on and so forth. So that's where really we can leverage using a lot of different data to move the needle for a client. And that's where we lean into the data analysis and data science and stuff like that.
But before that, you have to have clean, accurate data to work with.
And that's kind of where they come into play. So when it's not quite the cleanest and when it's not quite the easiest and it's not quite as accessible as you might like, that's where a data scientist comes in.
So where do your bookkeepers and accountants come in?
So most of our bookkeeping work is, truly outsourced. So we don't do a lot of the bookkeeping internally. We partner, with other people in the industry and have the client work directly with them. So we will refer out, tax, bookkeeping, payroll, HR, all those things that they might have in the past leaned on us for. We'll use partners for that.
So how do you know that data is correct when you get it from those financial information? Obviously HubSpot, I've worked with HubSpot, worked with customers in HubSpot and a lot of other CRMs. They're not always pristine either.
Yeah.
So how do you feel comfortable?
Sure. So, and let's kind of put this sort of into the context of the advisory engagement. So when we're working with a client, there's going to be some big rocks typically at the front that are easy to advise on, things that are low input, high impact, and we can sometimes lean into those things and prioritize those above anything else. But as we work with a long-term relationship with our client, we want to always be providing value. We all want to always be moving the needle in a significant way. So at the start, we very well may not be doing anything with a data scientist, for instance. But as the engagement progresses, we're going to get sort of more nuanced. The big rocks are going to be a little bit smaller rocks, and we're going to be basically going from grinding to buffing to polishing, and so that's where we would lean into some of those things. But it sort of gets the timeline of the heavier lifts essentially gets spread out over the course of the engagement. And
so
that's
you not only went from being a traditional CPA firm with 18 people, when you cut back, you didn't necessarily replace any of those 18 people with accountants.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even just an accounting firm using Tableau, you need some quite specific skills to get what you need out of Tableau and to customize that for your clients and all that type of stuff. Whereas you have a lot of out of the box financial reporting and all that type of stuff providers. But if you've gone down the Tableau route, you need some quite specific skills and then actually you are building truly customized reports and dashboards and whatever based on your clients' needs and most likely the evolving needs of those clients as well. And that does require, that data scientist. It's amazing that you've got the CPA with Tableau experience. I would hazard a guess that they probably weren't in public accounting either, that CPA prior to this role.
Yeah, most of the work they do is private,
Yeah.
and they're very much a, contractor kind of outsource service. But yeah, she does that type of work for a lot of different companies. So not public. Yeah.
So internally, what's the type of person you have working for you?
So 2 people right now, basically on the delivery. So one is our Tableau reporting specialist. His name's Jason. The other one is our data manager. And so kind of like back to your question, her name's Cassandra, but what she does is she makes sure that the data we have is consistently to a certain standard, and she coaches up whoever is internal for our client or their outsourced bookkeeper or even their CPA who hasn't touched the books in a couple months, whatever it might be.
Wow.
She encourages them to help us meet our timeline so we have good data so we can advise on it. Yeah.
Well, James, sort of as we sort of look at the clock, it's one of those ones that I know that we could continue talking and learning from your experiences. As we sort of close out today's episode, what's your I don't know, it's like, I don't want to say your big learning, but what are some of the insights that you've picked up? I mean, it's also quite fascinating. You're in the mental health accounting space, and there's so much emphasis on mental health these days. Like, what are some of the insights that you've taken over from the last couple of years on this journey that you've been on that you think listeners, accountants and bookkeepers should sort of be thinking about?
Yeah, I guess if there's a moral to the story, we can't be all things to all people. And we do ourselves a disservice and we do them a disservice if we pretend it's otherwise. So everyone is going to, through the course of their career, find something they just feel more attracted to. They're going to find something they feel more capable at. And really, we all have to believe that value follows value. And if you are good at something and you're in front of the right people doing it, you'll do well. And they'll spread the news. Deming also was very keen on that. He said, hey, we get more clients by serving clients well. There's customers, And so, yeah, have some faith in yourself, have some faith in what you've learned through this journey, whatever that journey might be. And, sometimes it just takes a little bit of guts to sort of be honest that you want to give yourself a shot.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Penny, any final comments from you?
Stoked. Are you kidding me? I was sitting here and about 2 kilometers from where I sat on a mountain and in 1999 said, you could do this remotely and we could do it better. And here is somebody in Wyoming doing the same damn thing and doing it well in a vertical. I mean, he didn't read our book, but Damien, he did every single step to get to
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also love that, you know what, I took myself off to the American Association of Psychologists for their annual conference to learn. And I think that's a really powerful lesson, one of many across today's episode, of like, get out and hang out where your clients or your customers go for their information.
Exactly.
And I know I've spoken to a lot of accounting practitioners that have built very, very strong vertical businesses. And that's exactly what they did. They got out and they went to that's where they hang out. They don't hang out at the CPA, the AICPA, the state societies. That they go and I wouldn't be surprised, James, if if next year you're not submitting topics to the conference roster to be speaking on, so that you are that expert in running and growing the data that sits behind running one of these practices. So yeah, I'm absolutely stoked just hearing this, and I loved. I wrote down, I don't want to half-ass, I want to haul-ass. I really like that. So I wrote that one down as well. So I thought that was a great one. So
I used to say that all the time. Don't be a half-ass.
but I haven't heard the
whole whole ass.
But I haven't heard the whole ass part. I've certainly heard the half-ass, but I think that's the first time I've heard I want a whole ass.
He is in Wyoming, the least populated state in the union.
Yeah.
And he has clients across the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thank you very much for sharing your story. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I'm excited to sort of connect with you on LinkedIn and follow along. And I wish you the best of luck growing this practice and making a real impact in the lives of your clients. And again, I'll sort of close out with another thing where when the gap of where they are and when they want to be, my job is to close that gap. I love that. And thank you very much for sharing that today.
That's so wonderful.
James, thank you very much.
Thank you,
James.
Glad to be with you today. Thanks so much.
All
so
right.
folks, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor, share it on your social media profiles, give it a like, share a rating depending on the platform that you're on, and join us on our next episode where Penny, I guess we'll decide on what we want to talk about then.
Yeah, we will. I got an idea.
We'll work it out. Penny, always good to see you. James, thank you very much. And folks, keep an eye out for Strategy in the Virtual Controller and maybe share it with your friends if you've enjoyed today's episode. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.